Hello everyone and welcome to Billable Time. My name is Mo Hussain and I host a legal podcast called Billable Time with Moi, where I talk to lawyers, law students, and other legal professionals who have valuable career insights that can help up-and-coming professionals like myself in navigating the complexities within the legal industry. Funny enough, I'm actually at the headquarters of Fasken because I spoke to an incredibly gracious human being by the name of Jonathan Duforest, who was gracious enough with his time and energy in providing different tips on what it's like being a corporate lawyer, day in the life, different OCI tips, and his law school journey. It was an incredibly valuable conversation, and I'm really grateful for Jonathan for taking the time to chat. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you thought, and enjoy the episode. Jonathan, I guess I start off most interviews by asking, what is it like being you? I guess.
I don't think it's all that interesting. No, but I joke. No, look, it's good. It's kind of crazy that not even 2 years ago I was here as a student.
Yeah.
You know, and now being a little removed, it's kind of cool. Yeah. But no, I mean, being me, so yeah, like you mentioned, I'm a first year associate in the capital markets and M&A group at Fasken. I'm trying to build kind of a very broad M&A and securities practice. And I would say it's been interesting since graduating law school.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll note I think my personal experience now practicing law, but in law school and kind of the whole journey, is it always feels like you're on a steep learning curve.
Right.
So you get into law school, let's say a big push, and then you finally get there. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I need to get good grades. I want to put myself in a good position. I want to participate in the OCI process, and then you do that. You're like, okay, great. And you get through the OCI process. And I was fortunate at Fasken. Then you go, you're a summer student. And then okay, I'm a decent summer student now. And then you leave and you come back to school.
It's just a gradual, there's another level everywhere you go.
And the one thing I'll note is that it doesn't, at least in my experience, really stop. Because then you come back and you're articling. I say, okay, I want to hone my skills, and this is, I'm here for 10 months now, right? And then, all goes well. I come back to an associate, and now I'm living, I'm now practicing law.
Yeah.
And it's that learning curve, right? The expectations are different. Your naturally your skills improve, right, year after year. So look, being me right now is just I'm really trying as hard as possible to become the best technical lawyer.
Okay.
And then in the interim, if I can come back to Windsor as much as I can, I love coming out here and speaking to students like yourselves. I always thoroughly enjoy that. But yeah, so how it is being me right now is I'm trying to have a balance as well. I try to obviously become an excellent technical lawyer, but even beyond just working stuff, and try to stay in shape. Otherwise, to be honest, there's nothing I would say crazy about being me. I think I'm just like every other practicing lawyer.
For sure. And it's interesting you brought that up because it does feel like that for a lot of law students, where it's just like it's a process to get in, and then one elevators have to go up, and then like you said, OCIs, and it can be a little bit of that you kind of steep learning curve in that sense. I guess the biggest question I have, since the fact that you were recently in our position, what would you say is sort of something about actually practicing that surprised you or was more so different than what you'd expected? I don't know if you probably watch Suits or anything like that, but I think a lot of people have different expectations with that, and Harvey Specter and whatnot. But in terms of just the reality versus the expectation when you're in law school, what was that like for either good or bad, or either way?
So a couple things on that. So I think every law student ever in the last 15 years, of course I was.
Yeah.
And I was actually, during an episode of Suits, I still remember the episode, that it really clicked, and I was like, I want to be a lawyer.
Oh, so it came off of that as well.
It was always in my field. I did debate class. I took debate classes in
100%.
high school, and it was interesting, but it was never something. It was kind of like, okay, into law. And then I watched the episode. I was like, I want to be a lawyer.
That's cool. That's the dopest thing. Because sometimes I'm scared to talk about it, but I watched 3 or 4 episodes, and I was like, what is it like getting into like law school? And then all of a sudden,
and it's cool. And funny enough, the Fasken also being in the Bay Adelaide Center.
Oh, really?
Where they filmed.
So
it's the lobby.
So it's just the stars are aligning. Like everywhere you go. That's cool.
When I work late at night, I walk, I feel like. But to that point, at least I found the biggest, I would say maybe learning curve, or I would say sometimes gap, is the theory versus the actual practice of law.
Okay.
So in law school, they do a great job. You learn the black letter law, how to apply it, and I find it's also very litigation driven, right? You're reading cases and you're learning how to interpret the law through case and the Socratic method in class and stuff. But then once you get to practice, things change a little bit. Of course, you're still practicing law, and law is above all in the government. But first and foremost, at least the way I see it, is it's business.
Okay.
Right? And now you're selling legal services, and you're selling your time. Right? So to the point that, in law school, for example, you would spend hours and hours and hours and hours on a memo.
Yeah.
Right? You still need to spend the time to do it properly, but now when you're in practice, you have to find a way to be a bit more efficient with this. And also to that point, I would say the practical element of now you're practicing, especially as an M&A and securities lawyer, so don't litigate or draft factums. Sometimes draft a memo here and there, but now it's a lot more. If you're drafting an opinion on an offering, right? And things in that sense are a bit more practical. And until you've really experienced it, I don't think there's anything that you can really do in law school other than getting that practical experience that really prepares you for it. If that kind of makes sense.
That definitely does make sense.
Like understanding the OBCA, right? It's a statute. How to read it, how to interpret it, how to apply it. Like, great, you learn that, but you're not learning how to run point on a deal. Right?
Interesting.
And so I think, and that comes back to that learning curve piece I was mentioning. That only really occurs when you start really getting into the thick of it and actually doing it. And I'm a big proponent that I think just in the legal world as a whole, the best way to learn it is by doing it. You're not going to learn it by sitting there, of course there's resources, there's books that you could read that will help.
Yeah.
But until you actually do it and you live it, and understanding how to manage the timeline on a deal.
100%.
Like simple thing, even it's things that I'm kind of working on now is how do I manage the client's expectation?
Wow.
Right? Because you get
even as an associate, that's something that you're thinking about.
On some matters, our clients that you might be the first point of contact are reaching out to you directly, right? And you need to be able to set realistic expectations too, right? Like, some things, and of course we always try our hardest, but sometimes, and take real estate's a great example.
Right.
You can only move as quickly as some other third parties will allow you, right? If you're waiting on a municipal zoning or something in that
that's kind of going to keep you in a...
there's nothing that we can keep following up with the municipalities.
100%,
but until they
there's only so many follow-ups you can do,
right? And these are all pieces you don't necessarily learn
in law school.
In school, but it gives you the legal knowledge and toolkit to deal with it. It's kind of sets a floor for the practice, if that kind of makes sense.
That does make sense. And when you said the memo, it took a couple hours. I felt that was a direct FBI. I don't know if you have cameras for me, but a lot of hours, But that point of efficiency, I think a lot of people can benefit from. And I just came off doing a term sheet for the first time.
Yeah.
And that was just like, I was like, I know about offer acceptance. I thought these concepts would apply, and then you get into share rights agreements, you get into investor rights agreements, you get into right of code. And I'm like, whoa, this is a new concept, right?
Understanding how they all interlink.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And especially more so now, being on deal teams and seeing the global transaction structure, you need to have that understanding, which is another point you don't necessarily learn here. You don't necessarily learn, you have the idea of what a purchase agreement is. But then you start getting into rights of first refusal,
stuff like that.
The ROFR agreements, we call them, right? And shareholders agreements, and understanding how they interlink is kind of something new.
I just finished that last night, and so that to me is immediately fresh. But the idea of the people doing this every single day and kind of not having that knowledge even in law school, I was like, man, if I had a course on this, it would have been much easier, But speaking on going back into sort of the law school piece in your journey, I think we briefly spoke a couple months ago, and you were incredibly gracious in terms of offering your perspective on how you managed to succeed in law school, because especially for those who aren't familiar with our program, in terms of standing out in the legal profession when you have schools like the University of Toronto and other schools like that can be a little challenging. And so for anyone who's in a position like, for example, that's in an incredible school like Windsor, or other schools where sometimes, there's more of an emphasis on how to stand out or do well in law school, what would you say would be the John Duforest, I guess, like tips or things to keep in mind within that journey?
In respect to how to stand out?
Yeah.
I would say first and foremost is being involved.
Okay.
Right? I think like everything in life, and especially employers in the legal context, they want people that are going to be, that they believe have the intellect to succeed and so forth. But that's kind of just like a baseline. That's really a threshold. After that, like what else? So, everybody's in law school. Everybody's incredibly smart. Everyone's a great student. That's how they got here. Now, so when you get here, like what is it now that's going to help differentiate me? I found, personally speaking, was getting involved in the community, in the school, right? Because beyond that, and I think it's a piece that we don't talk about enough in law school, is the connections you make now, the networking you do now, I think a lot of people write off, and they don't realize how important it is. And I'll give you a prime example. I was just an articling student, and especially I think most of the big firms, but especially Fasken, they really put emphasis early on removing the pressure of having to bring in business, right? There, and kind of like...
You're there to kind of learn how to be a lawyer first. Yeah.
Jonathan, become the best technical lawyer you can be, because later on, you have that skill set that you can sell.
Yes.
So if you focus so much on the sales piece and getting clients early on, then...
You're not going to have anything to sell.
Right? And if you're not going to sell, you're not going to sell.
Yeah.
Right? So, back to the networking piece.
Yes.
This kind of fell into my lap, but it was... just being in Windsor and getting to know people beyond the law school in Windsor, and then funny enough, I was able to actually bring in a client.
Through
article.
Wow.
And it was somebody that I had met here in Windsor and continued the connection, and we call, and I regard him as a personal friend, and it was nice to see how that came about, but it made me realize truly how important it is, and you're going to see. And being in Toronto and on Bay Street, and Toronto is a massive city. Yeah. But it's so funny that you regularly bump into the same people you went to law school with at a different firm, and oftentimes of course not sharing any confidential
100%.
But it's very common if I sometimes have a securities question, I'll call one of my buddies. Hey, I'm kind of dealing with an issue. Have you dealt with this in the past? Yeah. Okay. How'd you go about it? And I'll get those calls too. Like, hey, John, like I'm dealing with this. What would you suggest, or how did you approach it? And just sharing that, and I think that's really, really underrated in law school. So I think that piece, but I think there's so many things I got to do in law school that I think helped me stand out. So I was part of a couple clubs, which is great. I was on a corporate law club, and a sports law club. That was a great experience. But then I also, that experience in Judge Parker as an extern, and I think that the externships in particular are very unique to Windsor, but especially the dual program. Yes. Right? Because when I was going and I was interviewing these places, and I was able to put that I externed for a judge, there was very, very few other candidates that got that experience.
Wow. Yeah, that's right.
Being able to speak to some of those cases, and it was an incredible experience. So I think that also really helped me stand up. And the one thing I think helped me a lot, and the one thing I'm happy I did in law school, is I never got comfortable. Okay. In the sense that I was, great, I had good grades, great. Okay, what else can I do?
Wow.
Extra.
You could not drive home.
Yeah, and I think that really helped. And then I was really fortunate. My 2L year, I got to contracts the 1L contracts course. Sorry, I got to
tutorial, TA.
Yes, I got to TA the contracts course. But all those experiences, I think, really made me stand out. And I remember going into those interviews during that OCI process. And the conversation was not about my grades, and it was, right, cool experience, tell me about that, and, okay, awesome, look, funny enough, everyone loves this contracts professor, and at the time it was Troy Harris, and I'm like, you're the TA, and I think that helps a lot, and especially going through that process, in my experience, is just having some really, really cool talking points, 100%, make things so much easier. So I guess that's kind of what I would say. It's trying to get involved. Obviously, don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't come in as very and join 6 clubs, and because there's still the school piece of it. But that's kind of what I would say. If you can get involved early, and just don't lose sight that your interactions with people in your immediate circle they're going to have
They're going to pay dividends or opposite later on,
right?
I guess.
Depending how you govern yourself. Yeah, that's what I would say.
For sure. One of the things that's interesting as like a one-up right now is you're just going by like this, about like 40 days left in the semester, and then
the whole thing goes like this.
Boom! OCIs. And from a standpoint of preparing for that. And so, you know, with everything flying by so fast, and obviously with you having succeeded in the OCI process, and you're obviously one of the few tools to properly do that as well, what would you say is a piece of advice or thing that you kind of learned most during that OCI process that helped you stand out from the rest of your colleagues, or even just amongst just other law students in general? Because there's a lot of law students that I've even heard that have even gotten the grades, been able to succeed in certain cases, but when it comes to crossing that finish line as to actually finding an OCI placement, it doesn't really work out that way. What would you say to that?
So, look, and I think you got it right there. That it's a very competitive process.
Yes.
It's not an easy process.
Yeah.
And you know, it's certainly daunting. I remember being in your shoes, and it's stressful. And one thing I found that really helped me was I would always go back to my athletic background.
Okay.
And a lot of those skills that I learned, especially as a varsity athlete.
Yeah. Maybe elaborate on that just in terms of the athletic experience.
So
it's pretty unique.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate, and out of high school, I got recruited to play college baseball, and I went to a small school in Texas called Weatherford College.
Oh, really? Okay.
And played baseball. And at that point, funny enough, coming back to the law piece and watching Suits, we watched Suits a lot. And I remember, I was, you know, and I was being from Montreal originally. McGill was kind of always an option.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? Like, I was a decent baseball player. I wasn't, I think, going to make a living doing it long term.
Okay.
So I said, all right. And I made the decision to go back to McGill.
Okay.
And pursued Bachelor's of Education. And McGill, the way it's
So this is after you already finished the degree in Texas?
No. So I played for, I was there for a year.
Okay.
And then I made the switch.
Got it.
And so going to McGill, and then at McGill, it was Bachelor's of Education. You get your teaching license at the same time.
Oh, wow.
So I did there, played 4 seasons.
So
at McGill.
Mr. Duforest, I'm assuming, was that something that was called?
Very briefly. For all of 6 weeks. And then
Okay.
But then, and to that point too, to your question earlier about what else helped me stand out was I was always trying to leverage that background and market that skill set.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I've never been in an interview or met somebody or anything, and someone says, I'm not good at stress management. I'm not good. Everyone's the best at multitasking.
Everyone's the best salesperson when it comes to actually on an interview, right?
But like, what examples do you have?
Right.
And so I was able to relate a lot of that experience throughout the OCI process. Wow. And it was an easy thing to come in and say, oh, hey, Jonathan, baseball. And you know, it was an easy connection. But to your question was that skill set and being able to break those pieces down. And you know, I would always, and also the confidence in it too.
Okay.
And you know, it's normal, you doubt yourself throughout law school.
Right.
It's part of the process,
I'm assuming. Yeah,
completely normal.
100%.
Then being able to revert back, okay, like, you know, I was at McGill, I was a student athlete. It was fun while we were there. Baseball team, we had won 5 straight national championships.
Right.
And that, being able to maintain good grades, that was a source of confidence for me. That I was always kind of.
That was almost like a Jordan type of run. That's 5 championships.
But then also, I was really fortunate too. So my dad, being born in France, I'm a dual citizen at birth.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I was really fortunate, and I spent 10 years with the French, the Olympic team.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so again, those experiences, and this was one I really leveraged throughout the process, is I remember my last year at McGill, and the season was in the fall, and I had played in the 23 and under European Championships. Came home for a few weeks, the baseball season started, we were training camp, so forth. I got the call because there was the Olympic qualifiers for, at the time, it was Tokyo, was 2020.
That's right, 2020, yeah.
So then I flew back to France for, I think, 10 days, something like that.
Okay.
Played a bunch of games. Training camp, you had to make the team.
That's right.
26-man roster, made the team. Then we went to Germany. For the first.
Seems like a bit of a tour.
And went to Germany for the Olympic qualifiers.
Yeah.
But I remember I was in school at the time, so I'm trying to keep up with school.
Okay.
We're competing for an Olympic bid.
Wow.
And I'm trying to study for the LSAT, trying to get my law school applications together.
Wow.
And I remember when I talked about multitasking and stuff, those were anecdotes that I would share,
100%.
and I think that helped me a lot.
Wow.
But then beyond that, like I said, I revert to my athletic experience and my approach going into the OCI process and so forth. is that as daunting as it may seem, is to break things down and go day by day.
Wow.
And give yourself like reasonable and attainable goals. Okay. So if you sit there and I need to get a job, well, that's kind of okay. So what can you control today? Like step one, what can you
control the controllable?
Okay, I'm going to send 3 emails today with dual alarms or Windsor alarms or try to schedule a coffee chat.
Yeah.
Right. And then you do that. Okay. Hey, you know what? Today I want to research X number of firms. Today and then when you get close to the application, today I want to try to finish up X number of firms. And then but then sometimes you're busy and things happen and you got to prioritize. Okay, great. Right now I have this list of 20 firms that I've heard great things about that I like. Where will I right now see myself?
Wow.
And then rank those and then, schedule your time accordingly.
Because there's only a certain amount of firms you can apply to, and then put the amount of time that you can research.
Yeah, I think it's more so like a timing thing for you, right? Life happens, but I don't think there's, so to speak, like a limit.
Yeah.
So and I remember, and then the other thing is that helped me a lot and came back to my athletic experience was like blocking out the noise, the chatter, and you know.
That's very important. Yeah.
I heard law school is a hyper competitive environment.
Yeah.
And you have some people that go about things differently, and you go, how many interviews do you have? Where are you interviewing? And I chose not to take that approach, and I got really great advice on it. I kind of kept my cards close to my chest, so to speak, but again, that athletic experience really helped me kind of just block out the noise. And that's what I would say. Like, it is daunting, and going through it. And the other piece I would say is your approach. I took the approach to it. I remember some people take very nervous, right? Oh, I need to network, and I found I'm a pretty social person. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I remember going into it being like, look, even if nothing,
this is just for fun. I'm
like, this is great.
Yeah.
How many other opportunities am I going to get like this, especially in law school, to speak with as many lawyers, junior associates, partners, senior partners, kind of the whole spectrum of people. And I kind of enjoyed it. And I think also that approach really helped me throughout that process.
One of the things I think that's even I got told in terms of advice is like there's no such thing as like networking. It's more so just like a relationships business.
Yes.
Like you got to build relationships. If you look at it from a standpoint of building relationships, you'll have people that kind of naturally want to do.
Especially if you're genuine.
Yeah.
I think especially in our industry.
Yeah.
I think networking is a huge component.
Yeah.
But I think because people do so much of it that they can very, very quickly
100% lose that authenticity. Yeah.
And even now, sometimes, I try to meet with every student that messages me regarding this process. I always try to make time for a call or coffee, something. And, sometimes I've had great conversations. I love speaking to as many students as possible. And then some other time, I can kind of tell.
When someone's kind of just...
Even off the bat, like, I'm not going to meet with you. I just know that, you're kind of doing this to
just to get a job,
yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
So building on that, and I'll probably just have just two more questions for you, because I always appreciate you taking the time for that. In terms of that networking piece, obviously we're about to go into a networking event right now.
Yeah.
What would you say is that piece of advice? Because like you said, it can be the differentiator between either someone like yourself or other people being like, I want to take a chance on that person or not. What would you say are some things that, pieces of advice in terms of actual networking that that's either helped you or was also, as someone who's been approached to chat or and whatnot, you've kind of looked at as, okay, sifting through, I really like how this person, was talking about this, or this person really resonated. What are some do's and don'ts in your opinion?
I think the biggest piece, if you're looking at networking, is to remain your authentic professional self.
Right. I noticed that second word right there, authentic and professional
self. And it's always good, of course, you want to be yourself, and you want to be comfortable, and you want to be in an environment where you're comfortable. But at the same time, especially, keep in mind, you're going to these networking events. Yeah. You're not necessarily grabbing some drinks with some friends.
Yeah.
It's a different context. It's a bit more of a professional setting, and people are there oftentimes to exchange contact, to exchange ideas. There's a business element
100%.
to it. And so I think it's important not to lose sight of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, simple things. Don't divulge too much. Be yourself.
100%.
Always have almost like an elevator pitch. Like really, just a couple things that you can say that gives a bit of context to you, like who you are, and it's like, okay, cool. And that will usually prompt further discussion. So if I go into a meeting, a networking event like that, like, hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you. And kind of, okay, so like, what are you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm a lawyer.
Yeah.
I work
Sort of the dot.
I work at a big, I'm actually, so I'm actually a first-year associate. I'm M&A in capital markets, in the M&A capital markets group at Fasken.
Yeah.
And okay, cool. I actually, one of my buddies works at Fasken, and that's an easy connection.
Wow. Okay.
So I think it comes down to, and similar to the OCI problem, it's just finding parallels.
Right.
And coming down.
Yeah.
And I think you have a couple of things like that. And obviously, of course, if you have a few fun stories that you can share, that always usually makes it a nice impression with people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it comes down to being yourself, being authentic, staying professional, but friendly. Professional but friendly is probably the best way to look at it, I think. And just always have a few things, just go with the flow. I know some people, and I've seen it before, and you speak to some people, and they'll take networking like, I need to go in and make this contact.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't think that approach works. I think if anything, it turns people off.
Really?
Right? Because it just
comes off
genuine, right?
Do you feel as though that comes off immediately? You can kind of like get a sense for who's just there for sort of to build that connection.
I certainly call them experienced networkers. So I think do.
I think in terms of networking and managing all this sort of stuff, I think maybe just going back to the sort of the practicals and things of like, what is a day in the life of I'd love to learn about like in terms of law school, what you kind of did to kind of maximize your time and whatnot, and then even now as a lawyer, like what was kind of the day in the life back then, and then sort of compared to now.
I think the biggest piece revolves around predictability.
Really?
In law school,
I've never heard that before.
Life happens, but for the most part, Tuesday your schedule is this. You have this class on Thursday. You have this on Friday. This is the deadline for, March 14th.
Yeah.
Like, now, practically speaking, business needs change. And at the end of the day, as a lawyer, you're a service provider, right? You're selling services. And so, especially, I find in the corporate law context, but I think it's applicable to the broader practice more, is I think almost every business decision is to a certain extent a legal decision.
Okay.
But to a certain extent,
Yeah.
right? It's a piece of. And let's say we're in a boardroom here, but let's say we're in a business. Legal is one seat, and it's
that's right.
And there's risks, and you try to advise on the risks, and you propose best course. But at the end of the day, you're just a piece
of
the puzzle. And so to that, when you're now in practice, is those needs and that urgency can change. So the conversation you might have with the client is, hey, we need this, next Wednesday. And next thing you know, Friday afternoon, you're getting an email, hey, really sorry, but can we try and get this like Monday morning latest?
Wow.
Well, that changes, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And so I think is being able to prioritize. So I understand one, and at first it's kind of hard because you don't always know how long things are going to take.
Exactly.
So budgeting that time in. But then it's also, I think, learning to manage, and it's a skill like everything, learning to manage those timelines and building in buffer for that unpredictability, right? Whereas I think in school, it was easy for me to say, okay, look, I have class from 9 to 11. Okay, well, look, 11:30 to 1, I'm gonna do some work, so forth, go to the library, do some reading, maybe go to the gym later. And so now things, the best way to say it is but like more fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, this is probably gonna come up, and you try to be proactive. And sometimes it helps, sometimes it works, and sometimes things get accelerated or things get pushed too. Like sometimes everyone wants to close the deal on March 8th, and come to a few days before, and it's not going to happen. So those things slip, but then those files that we're going to pick up, you need to be able to manage those, right? So I think that's the biggest difference. 100% is the predictability.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to know, just circling back to the externship experience that you had. It's interesting you bring that up because a lot of times, for me, I think I probably have mentioned suits more than anybody right now in this interview in the history of this law school. But one of the things I guess you kind of get confused is lawyers and TV shows, they're drafting contracts and they're in court and they're this, and then you come to learn that, whoa, there's this and then there's that to a certain extent, right? And so on your end, I'm curious to know what were the takeaways working in the courtroom, and then how that kind of, or if there were any at that point, maybe not in that sense, but what were the kind of the most valuable learning experiences working in a courtroom, and how that translated to deal flow and M&A?
That's a great question because they're so different.
Yeah.
And so being in chambers, it's very, very heavy on writing, research, And those are skills that they look for. They want students that have demonstrated a strong ability to write and research. And I really loved when I was with my time with Judge Parker, because every day I was sitting in on proceedings, right? A criminal one, a civil one. Like it was so fascinating, and seeing some of these litigators, especially in federal court.
Yeah.
I've seen these litigators go at it every day. And then funny enough, I was convinced that I was going to be a litigator. I enjoyed it. It reminded me a lot of my athletic background.
Okay.
I moved it and stuff.
So there's a little bit of a high before you kind of go out and support.
Adrenaline. I really enjoyed it, and then I was convinced. And then luckily at Fasken is full service, and they really encourage you, especially summer students, to try a bit of everything.
And there's a rotational element, I'm assuming, with Fasken.
So we don't do a rotation
Okay.
at Fasken. And I personally like it this way. Is you can take a bit of work, so you can have litigation file, you can have corporate file, employment stuff, and I also like the employment sphere as well, because I love contracts. That was my favorite course in law school. Yeah, and still is to this day. And that piece, I was like, and I was open-minded with it too. And that's one thing I would urge everyone to be. Is some people in law school think I absolutely want to be a criminal defense lawyer. Then they start doing it. Like, oh, I mean, be open-minded. And then, so when as a summer student, I actually, my first file I ever got staffed on was an M&A. It was a public M&A deal. And I really like the element of working with the team. Okay. And you, as an M&A lawyer, you work with the specialists a lot. Right. Deals, right? Because the real estate component, heavy made some
specialists being like in terms of lawyers that work in specific tax law,
exactly,
real estate law,
real estate,
and
so forth. So
exactly.
we have real property on a component of the deal. All right, we got and also, as time goes on, you also pick up some pieces because you need to be able to issue spot, right? Because kind of
IRAC follows you wherever you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The IRAC. One thing I think with my legal education is, even in my personal life, I find it much easier to boil things like, what's the issue? What's the rule? What's the ratio?
IRAC applies everywhere.
and we apply. And I really like that piece. And what I like with it, I found it very, like, corporate work I was doing, very tangible. Yeah. In the sense that you're on the deal, and to the extent possible, you're always trying to move the deal forward. You're always trying to keep them. You're trying to create momentum and then keep it going, which I really like. And I kind of that was really my introduction to it, and that's really where I was like, I think I really want to be a corporate lawyer. And even then. And I look back to it, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good skill, the writing and the research. But I didn't love it as much. And I remember doing a memo as a summer student, after having done some of the corporate work, that I found it's very practical, right? Yeah. I'm advising a client, they don't want a 20-page memo. They say, hey, thanks, John. Can you put that in an email? Like,
wow.
I need, or here.
Was there a specific example where you're just like, man, I worked really hard on this? Well,
I was doing a memo, a research memo.
Yeah.
It just clicked in that moment. I was like, I think the corporate thing is for me. Like I like that. I like how practical it is, and I like the skill set. And the other piece I'd say I enjoy with it is the creativity. Okay.
Also elaborate on that.
Well, you see so many different types of transactions and structures, and the structures are very interesting in the sense that they're always tailored to the business needs, right? Okay. And so you can get creative with that in some form, and especially as lawyers, especially corporate lawyers, you're always trying to go back to a precedent. What's the closest deal that we did in the past that might be closest to this factually?
Interesting. So you're saying that, like, because usually precedents are discussed in terms of like litigation or case law.
Oh yeah.
You're saying that there is in the corporate world. It's the first time I'm hearing this sort of precedent in terms of like what deals have we done before.
Yes.
And that is also how the guy.
And to be honest,
wow,
that's a great point because I'm not even that far removed from law school. Like, the only term I use precedent for now is like, can you please give me a precedent?
Yeah, okay.
For this resolution or this purchase agreement or whatever it is. How do we do it in the past? It's so two completely different areas of law. Yeah. But I think they definitely complement each other. And also understanding, like, with that writing and research and that experience, that litigation experience with Judge Parker, helps you issue spot. The kind of, okay, like this, I mean, this is suitable, this is not, like, there's some risk here. Like, I don't know if I love this, right? And it's and then to the other piece now is like, let's run corporate searches on a client and they have litigation. It's kind of okay. Well, what are the implications? What's the risk? Let's say you're doing an asset purchase deal. Okay. Well, like, if you're for the seller, like, okay, well, maybe we need to find a way to exclude this litigation because why would we give the purchaser the benefit of whatever gains, of course, it's arising out of that litigation? Like, they didn't deal with it. Like, this, so yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting to say that. There's I'll be honest with you, there's a big elephant in the room in the legal community that I would like to ask you about. Very, very big debate, extremely controversial, very, very political. LexisNexus or Westlaw? if you would say one or the other on the research question, this is a very divisive topic now. What would you say what's the Jonathan
That's a very
preference on that?
So I'll give you the whole laydown. When I was a student at first, when I come in and do the trainings, I preferred Lexis.
Okay.
I found it more user friendly now. And then as time went on, actually funny enough, the Judge Parker Chamber. So Judge Parker tends to prefer Westlaw. Okay, no problems using Westlaw because the way you note the case and so forth. And then again, it's fascinating as bubbles, but now as a corporate lawyer, I think Westlaw's practical law, the tool.
I literally used that last night. Yeah.
It's a bit. I refer to it regularly. I know most lawyers and firm partners, especially, will look at it. It's a great tool. It gives you what is market, what's not. So if you're arguing over the permission to market or off market, usually practical law is the first piece. And oftentimes, sometimes if I'll go, I have a technical question, I'm wrestling with the concept, I'll just go to a partner on a course here or where, and they're like, okay, well, like, what's practical law say?
Wow. So even people at that level, in terms of Fasken being like a really, really large firm, even senior partners are going like, Westlaw is the way to practical law
tool. I know that Lexis is currently like they're making a really big push on that piece, but I think right now Westlaw might have a bit of an edge.
Okay.
And my personal I have practical law tabbed on my browser, and if I'm looking at something or I'm trying to see what's standard and what's not, practical law is my first stop.
It's interesting to me that in the first semester, for those that are aware, the dual program, we kind of jumped straight into doing briefs and memos and all that. Lexis was my go-to.
Yep, and same thing, the exact same deal.
Exact same deal.
Shepherdize the case.
There you go, that's what it is.
Shepherdize the case.
I shared on my Instagram story one time, I said, once I started using Westlaw, I quick captioned, I get it. And when I tell you, I think the level of debates that went on in terms of like, yes, it was a very polarized thought, but that point about
that's a very polarized.
Yeah. But both great services at the end of the day for legal professionals. In terms of that element, appreciate you sharing all those different elements on the practicalities of being a lawyer and a law student. If you were to say, and different advice you've already given in different questions here, but in terms of advice that you would have, just say for a 1L, Jonathan, or if you were to say a 1L, either a rising 1L or someone coming in right now that, maybe you wish you would have known going in, even though you've already taken incredible steps in your career, something that you would have think, man, like, if I just knew this, it probably would have helped me avoid XYZ hurdles. What would those be?
I would say, looking back, 1L to Jonathan, I would say learn, and law school practice, learn for your purposes.
Wow.
Not for like an extrinsic, and sometimes it's really easy to say, I'm gonna master, I'm gonna study hard for criminal law, I don't have a particular interest, but just so I can do well on the exam, which will help me get good grades, will help me, put myself in a good position for an OCI job, but I think looking back on it now, if I would have been able to kind of learn it for me, and this is good knowledge to have. You don't come across administrative proceeding, it is something.
Was there one thing that particularly you found, maybe nobody paid attention to this, but looking back now that you did, you were like, man, I learned this for my own, and it really helped me, I guess, later on in my career?
I think that it's still a thing. It's still going on, and sometimes you speak to Mark, hey, John, did you ever read that decision? On a securities piece, or something that we do a lot of what they call CLEs at Fasken. So you do a lunch meeting.
Oh, CLA.
No.
Things are ringing back.
CLA. And boardroom and lunch, and they'll present, and you're always kind of and sometimes, hey John, did you read that BC decision? Or hey, do you remember actually the core in terms of we're talking about MAEs? Hey, the MAE, this is kind of the baseline decision for MAEs. And I remember one partner even saying, if you've never read this case before, then you can't really say you're a serious M&A lawyer.
Wow.
But to that point, it's kind of like, okay, it's right, and it's easy. Sometimes, it's like I said, it's a steep learning curve, and you're busy with work and stuff. But I think it's always important to actively want to keep learning.
Right.
It's not, okay, yeah, I'm good for my purposes. But, understanding the piece, really understanding changes to legislation, how is that going to impact? Even I'm an M&A and securities lawyer. But trying to understand it, or at least trying to stay current with some changes to competition law, I think is important.
Wow.
Because, yeah, sure, we have your competition lawyers, and take care of that piece. But come back to that issue spotting and just that general understanding, like, hey, this is going to be a consider, and it's a value add. And that's like one thing I think in practice you're always looking to add value somehow, right? So you're trying to make the client's life easier. You're trying to create as much value as possible because, like everything, time and money are scrutinized.
100%.
Right? And when you're in a business that you're billing every 6 minutes, you need to be able to justify that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're always trying to add value. And so pieces like that, just having the general knowledge is easy kind of bank to add.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what Ty Lopez is up to, but the idea of knowledge is a very important key. It's definitely something that's really important. And one thing that I've taken away from this conversation is the idea of not getting comfortable. And even if, let's just say, like even going back to what you even just said, in the first 2 minutes of this conversation, going out of your way to learn more, do more. It's not necessarily for other people, wherever, maybe even your employer in certain contexts, but just for your own knowledge and learning what you have to do in terms of the legal profession. I would say the last question I ask you, and just personally in terms of reflecting on your career, is what kind of sort of inspires you to kind of keep going and sort of helps you kind of keep that drive of staying out of your comfort zone and do that? Because a lot of people at law school, on my end, I'm still kind of rolling with 5 different extracurriculars, grades and whatnot, but a lot of people kind of have this thing of, it's hard to kind of keep up with all that. What keeps your drive going?
I think it's like the progression.
Wow.
And even looking like 3L versus 1L, like, I know a lot more. I understand, I understand what resource to go to first. Like and then like article, like, okay, it's different now. This is you're practicing.
Yeah.
Technically practicing, but you're working on matters. It's no longer law school, right? The assignment, the answer is not necessarily going to be in one of these cases. Like there might not be an answer.
Wow.
And how to relay that.
Yeah, sorry, how to relay that.
Right? And so I think it's the progression. Even looking like year over year, like my progression, like professionally and personally, it's like you're in different space. Mm-hmm. So I think it's that, and it gets interesting. Like everything, there's days that are tougher. Okay, this is tough, and then you have other days that like you get something complex, and you go, you're kind of like best cut, relying on my experience. Then you get like, that's good job. I'm like, this was right. Like, cool. So
that definitely makes sense.
I'd say the progression for sure.
Well, I think I'm safe to say on my end, and anybody who's watching, we're excited to see your progression. Not only as a lawyer, but as a professional and all that. You've been incredibly gracious with. We have a networking in like 10, 20 minutes, and probably gonna have to talk about the same thing. But you taking the time to not only chat for this podcast, but for everyone else. I'm sure every student that you've helped mentor, every student that you've helped guide along this path is definitely grateful for that, and we're looking forward to your progression. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time.
Having me.
Absolutely. Well, that was it. Thank you again to Jonathan for taking the time to chat. It was an incredible conversation, and that day, actually, funny enough, he not only took time to chat in this interview, but also came around to be a part of a networking panel, part of the Student Bar Association at the University of Detroit Mercy, talking about his journey as a dual JD grad. So Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time. And we have more interviews to come with more lawyers, so stay tuned for that. But for now, and for Billable Time, I'm Mo Hussain in Toronto.